Julia sat behind the counter of her bookshop. The opening rush had quietened down now. She wouldn't use the word bonanza because it hadn't been one, but business in their first month had been brisk for them. Them being her and her boyfriend Mark, who was leaning on the counter, complaining about his latest job. Although he'd been hanging around the shop, getting under her feet since 4:30 p.m. Any job which let out that early didn't seem like it could be quite so terrible to Julia. He had white paint streaked across one cheek, something that Julia wondered if he did on purpose to be endearing. She was just considering wetting one finger and wiping the paint off, when the shop door clattered open and a man came in, looking hurried. He was average height and middle-aged. His most outstanding feature was his suit, which even Julia could tell looked expensive and well-tailored. If Julia was examining the man, then he was repaying the attention with interest, looking at her bug-eyed as he bustled across the shop floor to her. "Are you Julia Ford?" the man asked, slightly breathless. "Yes," Julia replied. "The private detective." Julia opened her mouth to tell the man she was no such thing, but Mark spoke before she could. "That's right," he said. "The private detective." Julia glared daggers at Mark. It was true that she had on a couple of occasions now assisted the police in catching killers, but they had purely been a case of her being in the right place at the right time. Or looked at another way, the wrong place at the wrong time. Either way, a private investigator she wasn't. However, it seemed her look was completely lost on the newcomer. "Good," he said, "because I need your help." "What's the problem?" asked Mark. The man began to speak, but Julia quickly cut him off. "We can't discuss this here in front of all the customers," she hissed to Mark. One elbow still on the counter, Mark made a show of turning to look round at the shop floor, empty except for the three of them and the stacks of books. To Julia's dismay, the stranger also looked round over their shoulder. When his head swiveled back to her, it bore a confused look. "Well, there might be a last-minute rush," Julia said. She sighed and looked at the man. "I suppose that you might as well carry on." The man extended his hand, which she noticed was slightly damp when she shook it. "My name is Ronald Cutty," he said. "I run an accounting firm over in Kingsbarrow. Cutty and Partners, you've probably heard of us." Julia hadn't, but she nodded anyway. "On Friday, an employee of mine, Miss Beatrice Campbell, was—" Mr. Cutty swallowed, his Adam's apple rising and falling before he continued. "Strangled to death." "I heard about that," Julia said. "How awful." In truth, when Julia had read in the papers that there had been a local murder, she'd felt a mild sense of relief that, for once, she wasn't caught up in the middle of it. Now she had a sinking feeling that was about to change.